Elias Vorn woke before the first light of dawn, his breath visible in the cold air of the asteroid settlement. The twin suns were still hidden behind the jagged cliffs, and the sky was a deep, heavy blue, dotted with faint stars that were fading as day approached. Elias pulled his coat tighter and stepped outside his small workshop. The settlement was quiet. Too quiet, he thought. The hum of distant machines echoed softly through the rocky terrain, but otherwise, the place was empty. He walked along the rough path toward the cliffs, scanning for any signs of trouble. The night had been unusually cold, and he had trouble shaking the feeling that something was wrong. As he rounded a boulder, he heard it, a faint, high-pitched chirping, almost like the sound of a tiny animal in distress. Elias froze. The sound came again, sharper this time, closer to the edge of the cliff. He crept forward, careful not to make a sound. At the base of the rocks, he found them. 3 small dragon hatchlings, no bigger than a human child, huddled together for warmth. Their scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, blue and silver like metal, and their tiny wings shivered with each breath. They were shaking, clearly cold, and their eyes, wide and fearful, looked up at him. Elias' heart skipped a beat. Dragons were almost extinct. Few humans had ever seen one, and even fewer had survived encounters with them. These hatchlings were dangerous, fragile, and miraculous all at once. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. One wrong move, and he could lose them, or worse. He knelt slowly, speaking in a calm, soft voice. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The words felt strange, even to him, as if he were talking to a child that could understand every meaning behind them. One of the hatchlings crept closer, sniffing the edge of his coat. Its tiny claws scratched the fabric, but Elias held still. The sound of the other 2 shivering made his chest tighten. He couldn't leave them here to freeze. Gently, he lifted the hatchlings one by one, tucking them inside his coat to share his body heat. They nestled into him, trembling, but gradually relaxing against his warmth. Elias moved carefully back toward his workshop, balancing the fragile creatures in his arms. Each step was slow, the rocky ground was uneven, and one wrong move could send a hatchling tumbling to the sharp stones below. Inside his workshop, Elias set the hatchlings on a soft mat he had prepared earlier for repairs and experiments. He wrapped them in heated blankets, checking each one carefully. They blinked up at him, their small eyes reflecting both fear and curiosity. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They were alive. He didn't know where they had come from or why they were abandoned. The nearest dragon pack was miles away, and dragons were not known to leave their young alone. Something had gone wrong. But for now, his job was simple: keep them alive. Elias searched his workshop for anything that could help. He rigged small heat lamps, poured liquid nutrients into tiny feeding tubes, and even used some old robotic servos to gently rock a hatchling that seemed the most frail. Hours passed quickly as he worked. Each tiny hiss or flutter of wings made his heart race. He had never cared for anything so small, so fragile, and yet he felt a fierce determination to protect them. Outside, the twin suns began to rise, spilling a pale gold light across the rocky cliffs. Elias paused for a moment, looking out the small window of his workshop. He imagined the dragon pack searching for their missing babies, unaware that a human was keeping them alive. Would they accept him? Would they see him as a threat? He didn't know, but he knew he had made a choice. The hatchlings began to calm, huddling together under the blankets. One of them let out a soft, tiny growl, almost like a sigh. Elias smiled. It was a small sound, but it told him they were beginning to trust him. For the first time that morning, he felt hope. He leaned back against the workbench, exhausted but alert. The dawn light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the workshop. He knew the day ahead would be difficult. The dragon's parents could arrive at any moment, and the rules of the settlement made it clear that humans were not allowed to interfere with alien species. Yet as he watched the hatchlings sleep, warm and safe, he felt that he had no choice. Elias made a silent promise. No matter what came, he would protect them. even if it meant standing against the world. The tiny dragons had no one else. And now, they had him. The air outside began to hum with the first signs of morning life, the faint crackle of machinery, the distant calls of native creatures, but inside, the workshop was a small island of warmth, safety, and fragile trust. Elias sat quietly, his eyes scanning the sleeping hatchlings, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the kind of awe that could only come from witnessing a miracle. Elias spent the next hours carefully watching the hatchlings. Their tiny bodies were fragile, and every twitch of a wing made him anxious. He had never cared for dragons before, only heard stories of their intelligence and power. Now, 3 small lives depended entirely on him. Every decision mattered. He adjusted the heat lamps over the sleeping creatures, making sure they were warm but not too hot. The blankets were soft, and he tucked them around the hatchlings' small bodies. One of them chirped softly, and he smiled. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe here." The sound of his voice seemed to calm them, though he knew they didn't fully understand his words. It was his presence, the warmth, and the care that mattered. Elias moved quickly but carefully, pouring the nutrient liquid into small feeding tubes. The hatchlings squeaked at first but slowly began to drink. One of them, the smallest and weakest, trembled and tried to climb onto his hand. He held it gently, letting it drink while supporting its tiny body. "You're stronger than you look," he said quietly, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. Inside, though, his heart was pounding. One wrong move could injure them, and he couldn't afford mistakes. As he worked, a faint warning beep echoed through the workshop. Elias froze. It was a transmission alert from the Planetary Authority, flashing red on the small screen. He approached cautiously. The message was short and clear: unauthorized interaction with alien species detected. Immediate investigation required. His stomach tightened. Dragons were protected, sacred creatures. Humans were not allowed to touch them or interfere in any way. Many who had tried had been fined, imprisoned, or worse. Elias looked down at the hatchlings. They were small, defenseless, and alive only because of him. If he left them, they could die in the cold. If he stayed, he could face severe consequences. He clenched his fists and took a deep breath. There was no choice. He would protect them, no matter what. The risk of punishment mattered less than their lives. He adjusted the feeding tubes and blankets, working as fast as possible but still careful. Every small movement had to be precise. Hours passed in a blur. Elias monitored their breathing, checking their tiny chests rising and falling. He hummed softly to himself, a sound that seemed to reassure them. One hatchling nestled into the curve of his arm, closing its eyes. Another pushed its head under the blanket for warmth. He realized he had begun to care for them in a way he had never cared for anyone before. They were not just creatures, these little dragons were lives he had to protect, no matter the cost. He paused and thought about the dragon pack that might be searching for them. The adults could be nearby, strong, and dangerous. What would they think when they saw him? Would they attack him for taking their young? Elias' mind raced with questions, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. He decided to strengthen the small workshop defenses. Using spare metal sheets, he reinforced the windows and doors to protect against scavenger creatures that sometimes roamed the cliffs. He rigged a small alarm system to alert him if anything approached. Every precaution mattered, every small step could save their lives. Time passed, and the first weak rays of sunlight filtered into the workshop. Elias took a moment to rest, sitting on a stool and watching the hatchlings. They had started to move a little more, their wings fluttering slightly as if testing their strength. One tiny dragon lifted its head and looked at him with wide, bright eyes. He felt a wave of connection, a bond forming that went beyond words. Suddenly, the alarm beeped again, but this time it was different, a soft vibration in the wall, like a distant rumble. Elias froze, his heart racing. Could it be the dragon pack? He peeked out the small window and saw movement on the cliffs. Large shapes shifted in the shadow of the rocks. His mind screamed caution, but he stayed calm. He had learned that fear could make mistakes, and he could not afford mistakes now. The hatchlings chirped nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Elias gently stroked one, whispering, "It's okay. Stay calm. I won't let anything hurt you." The words were simple, but his presence and tone seemed to soothe them. They nestled closer together, trusting him to protect them. Minutes passed like hours. The shapes moved away from the workshop, disappearing into the cliffs. Elias exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. For now, they were safe. But he knew this was only the beginning. Protecting them would not be easy. There were rules, dangers, and forces he could not control. Yet the little dragons depended on him, and that responsibility gave him strength. He looked down at the hatchlings again, their tiny bodies warm under the blankets, and made a quiet promise, "I will keep you alive. I will protect you, no matter what it takes." The bond between human and dragon had begun, fragile but real. The sun rose higher, painting the rocky cliffs in gold and orange light. Elias' workshop, once just a place for repairs and experiments, had become a small sanctuary of hope and courage. He had no idea what the day would bring, or how the dragon's parents would react, but he knew one thing: he would not abandon them. The little dragons had chosen life, and he had chosen to defend it. And in that quiet, golden dawn, a human and 3 tiny dragons began a story that would change everything. Elias had been awake for hours, watching over the hatchlings as they slowly gained strength. Their tiny wings twitched, and their eyes sparkled with curiosity. He had almost begun to relax, believing for a moment that nothing could reach them here. But then came a sound that froze him in place. A low, rumbling growl echoed across the rocky cliffs outside the workshop. It was deep and vibrating, unlike anything Elias had ever heard. The hatchlings stiffened, pressing closer together, their little claws digging into the blankets. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. That growl could only mean one thing: the adult dragons had arrived. He hurried to the small window, careful not to make a sound. At first, he could only see shadows moving among the rocks. Then, as the first golden light of the twin suns touched the cliffs, the shapes became clear. They were enormous, larger than any dragon he had imagined, their scales glinting in the sunlight. Muscles rippled beneath their skin as they moved, and their eyes, intelligent and watchful, locked onto his workshop. Elias' heart pounded. He had never faced creatures like this. He knew humans rarely survived encounters with adult dragons, especially when their young were involved. His mind raced. Should he hide? Should he run? But the hatchlings, so small, so helpless, looked up at him with trust. He couldn't abandon them. Not now. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Slowly, carefully, he stepped to the center of the workshop, holding one of the hatchlings close to his chest. He raised it slightly, showing it to the approaching dragons. It was a risky move. They could see it as a threat. Or, perhaps, they could see it as care. A deep, harmonic growl rolled from the cliffside. One of the dragons stepped forward, larger than the rest, its wings spread wide, shaking the dust and rocks beneath it. Elias felt the vibrations through the floor. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand tall. Fear wanted to make him flee, but he knew he had to remain calm. Fear could be deadly here. Courage might be his only chance. The dragons circled the workshop slowly, their heads low, eyes focused. Elias noticed their tails flicking, wings fluttering slightly, a sign of their tension. He mirrored their movements, lowering his own body slowly, keeping his hands visible, and letting the hatchling rest gently against his chest. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "I'm not your enemy. I'm only protecting them." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The largest dragon stopped at the edge of the workshop, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Elias held his breath. The hatchlings chirped softly in response, sensing the presence of their parents. He felt a wave of fear and hope at the same time. If the adults attacked, it would be over in seconds. Yet if they understood, something incredible could happen. Then, slowly, the largest dragon lowered its head closer to the hatchlings. It nudged one of them gently with its snout, examining it. Elias' heart leapt. The dragon wasn't attacking, it was checking, curious, cautious, protective. He exhaled softly, relieved but still alert. The pack began to circle again, each adult studying him and the hatchlings carefully. Elias realized they were intelligent beyond comprehension. They were assessing him, trying to understand why a human had the babies. Minutes passed like hours. Elias stayed still, every muscle tense, holding the hatchlings close. He could feel their tiny hearts beating rapidly against his chest, and he whispered to them, "Stay calm. Don't be afraid. We'll get through this." One of the smaller hatchlings moved its head toward him, nuzzling his neck as if seeking reassurance. The simple gesture strengthened his resolve. Then, almost imperceptibly, the largest dragon nodded its head slightly, a sign Elias recognized from old stories as acknowledgement or approval. His breath caught. Could they accept him? Could they understand that his care came from courage and compassion, not threat? He dared not move for a long moment, afraid to break the fragile connection. The other dragons gradually drew closer, still circling but keeping distance. Elias noticed their eyes softened slightly, watching him carefully, testing his patience and understanding. He spoke again in a low voice, steady and calm. "I only want to protect them. I won't harm them. I won't harm you." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dragon seemed to accept him. One of the adults touched the hatchlings gently with its snout, then turned to Elias, its gaze lingering for a long moment. Elias realized the pack was recognizing him as something unusual, a human brave enough to protect their young without fear or violence. In that moment, he felt an incredible mix of awe, respect, and relief. The hatchlings chirped softly, stretching their wings slightly. Elias allowed himself a small smile. The immediate danger had passed, but he knew this was only the beginning. The adult dragons were powerful, intelligent, and cautious. They could leave at any time, or they could return with challenges he could not yet imagine. But for now, they had accepted him, and the hatchlings were safe under his care. He lowered himself gently to the floor, still holding a hatchling. The dawn light streamed through the workshop window, painting the dragons and human together in gold. Elias felt a quiet, powerful sense of connection. In that moment, humans and dragons, once divided by fear and distance, shared a fragile bond built on courage, empathy, and trust. The pack stayed near the cliffs, watching, waiting, and slowly, Elias realized that he had earned their respect. A human had stood firm, not with weapons or strength, but with bravery and heart. The hatchlings were safe. And in the soft glow of dawn, Elias knew that the story between humans and dragons was just beginning. Elias stayed still, his chest rising and falling slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. The hatchlings curled closer to him, shivering slightly but beginning to calm. Outside, the dragon pack remained on the cliffs, watching him closely. Their eyes, large and intelligent, followed every movement, every breath. Elias could feel their scrutiny like a weight pressing against him. One wrong action, one wrong sound, and the fragile trust they were building could shatter in an instant. He knew he had to act with patience. Dragons were not just animals, they were smart, highly aware, and deeply protective of their young. Elias had read old stories of human explorers who had failed to understand this. Many had been injured or worse. But he couldn't let fear rule him. The hatchlings depended on him. Their tiny lives were in his hands, and that responsibility gave him strength he didn't know he had. Slowly, he lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged with a hatchling still resting against his chest. He kept his voice low and calm, speaking in soft, steady tones. "You're safe," he whispered. "I won't hurt you. I promise." The smallest hatchling chirped softly in response, curling into him for warmth. Elias could feel its tiny heartbeat against his own, and a wave of awe and protectiveness washed over him. The dragons outside shifted, their heads tilting, their eyes never leaving him. Elias realized they were communicating among themselves in deep, harmonic growls that vibrated through the rocks. He couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They were debating whether he could be trusted. Every muscle in their bodies was tense, ready to strike or flee. Elias understood that this was a test. He had to show them he meant no harm while keeping their young safe. He extended a hand slowly toward the closest hatchling, letting it nuzzle his palm. The gesture was small, gentle, and careful. Then, without breaking eye contact with the adult dragons, he touched the floor in front of him, lowering himself slightly more. His movements were deliberate, calm, and humble. He wanted the dragons to see that he did not challenge them, that he respected their power. One of the adults, the largest of the pack, took a hesitant step forward. Its scales gleamed in the sunlight, each movement precise and cautious. Elias froze, holding the hatchling firmly but gently. The dragon lowered its massive head, nudging the hatchling with its snout. The small creature chirped, not in fear, but in recognition of its parent. Elias' heart leapt. The dragon was not attacking. It was checking, assessing, communicating. Minutes passed with this careful dance of trust. The other dragons began to approach, their movements slow and deliberate. Elias kept his hands visible, kept his voice soft, kept his body low. The hatchlings chirped softly, wings twitching slightly, sensing the presence of their parents. Elias whispered words of reassurance, not that the dragons could understand, but that the hatchlings could. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm with you." Then something incredible happened. The largest dragon pressed its snout against the hatchling in Elias' arms, nudging it gently and then lifting its massive eyes to him. Elias could feel the weight of that gaze, not just curiosity, but recognition. The dragon seemed to understand that this human had protected its young, had kept them alive when they were vulnerable, had shown courage instead of fear. Elias swallowed hard. This moment, he realized, was extraordinary. The other dragons mirrored the gesture, nudging their hatchlings gently and keeping their eyes on Elias. Slowly, they moved closer, circling him but with no aggression. Elias could feel their intelligence, their judgment, and their growing acceptance. He had not only protected the hatchlings but had earned the respect of their powerful parents. Elias lowered himself further, sitting fully on the floor, careful to appear small, non-threatening, and calm. He allowed one hatchling to crawl onto his lap, letting it rest while he kept his gaze on the adults. A soft, harmonic hum rose from the pack, a sound Elias could feel more than hear. It was a sound of communication, approval, and understanding. They were not attacking. They were acknowledging him. The dawn sunlight illuminated the scene, painting dragons and human alike in gold. Elias felt a profound connection, unlike anything he had ever experienced. These creatures, legendary and almost mythical, had accepted him. He realized that humans were not powerless in the galaxy. Courage, care, and understanding could bridge worlds. He had shown bravery, patience, and empathy, and it had worked. For a long moment, Elias and the dragon simply existed together, the hatchling safe in the middle of the room, the adult standing guard but calm. He could feel the weight of the moment, the fragile trust that had been earned with quiet courage rather than force. His chest swelled with pride, awe, and relief. He had faced beings far stronger than himself, and yet he had survived not because of strength, but because of heart. As the hatchlings chirped softly and stirred in their warmth, Elias realized the story was only beginning. The bond he had formed with the dragon pack was rare, unprecedented. He had proven that humans could be more than fragile creatures on the edge of the galaxy. They could be protectors, allies, and friends to even the most powerful beings. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, the human and the dragons shared a connection that would shape the days to come. The hatchlings were safe, the pack was watching, and Elias knew he had taken the first step toward a future none could have predicted, one where courage, care, and understanding could change the course of lives and, perhaps, even the galaxy itself. The first full light of dawn spread across the rocky cliffs, painting everything in a soft golden glow. Elias stood outside his workshop, the hatchling safe in his arms, and watched as the dragon pack settled nearby. The adults remained alert, powerful and watchful, but there was no hostility. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a fragile respect that had been earned through courage, patience, and care. Elias felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. He had spent hours, then days, keeping the hatchlings alive, nurturing them with warmth and food, and protecting them from dangers both natural and human-made. Every choice he had made had carried risk. Every step he had taken had required courage. And now, as he looked at the dragons, he realized that his actions had not only saved the young but had also proven something extraordinary, that humans could be more than fragile creatures, they could be protectors, allies, and friends. The hatchlings chirped softly, stretching their tiny wings as if testing the strength of their new home. One of them wriggled free from his arms and scampered toward the nearest adult, who lowered its massive head in a gentle acknowledgement. Elias held his breath. The dragon nudged the hatchling with its snout, then lifted its eyes toward him. It was a look of recognition, almost gratitude. For the first time, Elias felt a bond with creatures far older, stronger, and wiser than himself. The pack moved around him slowly, circling and observing, their massive forms casting long shadows in the dawn light. Elias noticed subtle movements in their bodies, the flick of a tail, the tilt of a head, that spoke volumes. They were testing him, measuring his intentions, ensuring that he would continue to protect their young. He responded with stillness, calm breathing, and steady hands. Every moment he remained patient, every small gesture of care reinforced the trust they were beginning to place in him. It was then that Elias understood something profound. These dragons were not merely animals, they were intelligent, ancient, and capable of understanding the actions of other beings. His courage had not been a show of force, but a demonstration of empathy and commitment. By protecting the hatchlings, he had shown that humans could stand for life and compassion even in a galaxy that often valued power over understanding. The hatchlings began to explore more confidently, hopping toward their parents and testing their wings. Elias stepped back slightly, giving them space, but he remained close enough that they could still see him as a safe presence. The adults lowered themselves to the ground, wings folded, observing him silently. Elias could feel the unspoken communication between them, a careful balance of respect, caution, and acknowledgement. He realized then that this moment was bigger than him. It was not just about saving a few hatchlings. It was a statement to the galaxy: humans could rise to challenges, face beings far stronger than themselves, and earn trust through courage, care, and intelligence. His actions had created a bridge between species, a connection that might ripple far beyond this small asteroid settlement. Elias knelt on the rocky ground, allowing the hatchlings to climb onto his shoulders and lap. He whispered softly, "You're safe. Always." The largest adult dragon stepped closer, lowering its head near him. Its eyes held a calm intelligence, an acknowledgement that Elias was no longer just an outsider. He had earned a place, however small, in their world. The dawn grew brighter, casting golden rays over the valley and reflecting off the dragon's shimmering scales. Elias felt awe and humility as he watched the scene unfold. Humans were often seen as weak or fragile, limited to their small settlements and simple technologies. But here, in the presence of beings older than any human memory, he had shown that courage, compassion, and understanding were strengths no weapon could match. Slowly, the hatchlings returned to their parents, but they lingered near Elias, chirping softly, as if acknowledging that he had become part of their family. The adults allowed it, their powerful eyes observing him with quiet acceptance. In that moment, Elias understood that respect had been earned, not demanded. True respect, even from the most powerful beings, could only be gained through action, bravery, and care. He rose to his feet, brushing dust from his coat, and looked out across the cliffs. The twin suns were fully visible now, shining on the dragons and the small human who had dared to protect them. Elias felt a sense of peace and accomplishment unlike anything he had known. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged not just alive, but honored in a way no one had predicted. The dragon pack began to move, wings unfolding, preparing to return to their territory. The hatchlings chirped and hopped around Elias one last time. He knelt down, letting them nuzzle his hands and shoulders, feeling the warmth of life and trust. The pack lifted into the sky, powerful forms silhouetted against the rising suns, and Elias watched them go, knowing he had changed something fundamental. In the quiet that followed, the hatchlings remained near him, chirping softly and exploring their small surroundings. Elias felt a deep, steady pride. Humanity had shown what it could do, not through dominance, but through courage, patience, and heart. He had earned the trust of creatures thought too powerful, too alien, and too dangerous for humans to approach. And in that golden dawn, Elias knew that the bond he had created with the Dragon Pack was only the beginning. The world, or perhaps even the galaxy, had glimpsed what humans could be. Guardians. Protectors. Beings capable of bravery, compassion, and connection that could shape the future itself.